We assume moral reasoning is deliberate. The biological reality is faster. The brain recognizes moral truth and structural harm in precisely 1/60th of a second. Neuroscientist Dr. Donna Van Bogaert documented that the human brain processes roughly 60,000 stimuli daily. The window for precognitive recognition, the space between a stimulus and conscious thought, operates at a strict resolution of 1/60th of a second. We call this neurological pause the paradynia. This measurement forms the foundation of the precognitive conscience hypothesis. It proposes that conscience is an automatic recognition system acting before the deliberative mind engages. In 15th century China, philosopher Wang Yangming articulated this exact mechanism as liangji, innate moral knowing operating prior to reflection. Centuries later, Brazilian educator Paulo Freire validated this insight through conscientização, conscience in action. Across 3 civilizations, the conclusion is identical. Conscience is an automatic, pre-reflective recognition system. If a power structure wants to control a population without triggering this innate resistance, it cannot wait for deliberative debate. It must intercept and capture that 1/60th of a second. We call this interception precognitive substitution. It is the intentional engineering of public rhetoric to hijack the paradynia. By replacing human identities with manufactured threats in the media, the brain registers an enemy before rationally processing the reality of the target. Physical state violence is expensive and visible. Engineering an invisible architecture of consent secures control without firing a shot. In the 1880s, 2 entirely different ruling classes in North and South America deployed this exact psychological architecture against structurally equivalent populations. The Haymarket Affair of 1886 in Chicago and the Saraiva Law of 1881 in Brazil serve as identical blueprints for long-term civilizational lockouts, engineered to preempt the conscience of the public. Chicago in 1886 was the center of a rising labor movement. On the evening of May 4th, roughly 2,000 people gathered peacefully in Haymarket Square to demand an 8-hour workday and protest police violence. As police moved to disperse the legal assembly, an unidentified person threw a dynamite bomb into the officers' ranks. The state arrested 8 labor leaders. No physical evidence ever connected any of the defendants to the explosive. The prosecution abandoned the burden of physical guilt. They chose instead to criminalize speech and ideation, arguing the defendants' rhetoric had inspired the unknown bomber. 4 men were hanged for their words. The true architecture of this event was built in the newspapers. The Chicago Press, underwritten by industrial capital, executed a real-time linguistic hijack on the American public. The word worker was violently overwritten by the term anarchist threat. The concept of organized labor was fused with communist conspiracy, decades before actual Marxist-Leninist organizations held any influence in the United States. This media campaign pre-installed a threat association directly into the American public's paradigm. Conscience was preempted, allowing the state to execute innocent men with the full approval of the population. The Haymarket tactic evolved through the 1917 Palmer raids, scaling the local media hijack into a federalized weapon against organized labor. By 1928, Edward Bernays codified these decades of refinement into a formal discipline, the intelligent manipulation of the masses. Bernays applied this logic directly in 1954 Guatemala. Working for the United Fruit Company, he engineered a campaign that painted President Jacobo Arbenz' modest land reform policies as a direct Soviet infiltration. This blueprint became the foundational logic of Cold War military-industrial complex propaganda, a system President Eisenhower explicitly warned the public about in his 1961 farewell address. Whenever a state apparatus needs to avoid deliberative debate over resources, it recycles the 1886 Haymarket script. It hijacks the 1/60th of a second to turn foreign citizens into existential threats before the public can recognize their shared humanity. During the same decade, the Brazilian Empire deployed parallel architecture. Conventional history teaches the 1881 Saraiva Law as a modernizing electoral reform enacted under Emperor Dom Pedro II. The decisive mechanism of this law was a single provision. It established the absolute requirement of a literacy test for any citizen attempting to vote. This chart shows the demographic reality of Brazil at the time. The 1872 census documented an illiteracy rate of 82.3%, composed overwhelmingly of Afro-descendant survivors of enslavement. By design, the new legally engineered electorate shrank to less than 1.5% of the population. Exactly 7 years later, in 1888, Princess Isabel signed the Golden Law, formally abolishing slavery in Brazil. The elite freed the physical bodies of the enslaved. But they had already locked those exact individuals out of the ballot box and civic participation 7 years prior, anticipating the legal emancipation. We define this architecture as the double enslavement registry. The Saraiva Law captured the precognitive window of the state apparatus, legally substituting the word citizen with illiterate and incapable. This engineered a racial cage that remained legally intact for 107 years. There is no direct historical causation connecting the United States and Brazilian cases. However, they share a flawless structural identity. Both targeted specific populations, industrial labor in the US and the Afro-descendant rural poor in Brazil. Both relied on mechanisms of precognitive substitution, mass media panic replacing the concept of the worker, and legal literacy tests replacing the concept of the citizen. Both were deployed preemptively. The Haymarket arrests occurred just before the 8-hour workday breakthrough, and the Saraiva Law was enacted in anticipation of legal abolition. Ruling classes do not wait for the oppressed to gain power and then debate them on equal terms. They mathematically alter the credentials of humanity just before liberation occurs. Flash forward to Angicos, Brazil, in 1963. Paulo Freire's mission targeted the specific legislative logic holding the Saraiva Law in place. He recognized that literacy was the legally mandated barrier to the ballot. Teaching 300 sugarcane workers to read in 45 days functioned as a direct structural counterstrike against the state's disenfranchisement mechanism. Freire did not create their conscience. He provided the legal credentialing required to make their pre-existing conscience visible to the ballot box. He was functioning as a locksmith. The immediate state response was exile. The military government correctly recognized the threat of scaled conscientización and violently removed him from the country. Dismantling these architectures involves a direct attack on the structural criteria used to justify the lockout. In the digital era, we face a critical question. How do we protect the historically excluded from future precognitive hijacks? The Symbologia initiative is engineered as the exact structural inverse of the Saraiva Law. Where the Saraiva Law weaponized the colonizers' literacy as a barrier to exclude, Symbologia weaponizes literacy as inclusion. It gifts indigenous populations a script synthesized from their own ancestors, removing the requirement to learn the language of the excluder. This is powered by the Quartet validation standard. By running queries simultaneously through 4 independent AI models, the system prevents the biases of any single training corpus from capturing the narrative. This quartet acts as a distributed civilizational conscience check. It serves as a technological prosthesis that protects the 1/60th of a second on a global scale. Conscience cannot be legislated away. It can only be obscured. From the 15th century lectures of Wang Yang-ming to the digital quartets of 2026, the struggle remains the same: protecting the 1/60th of a second before bias can lock the cage.